Hey, it's Drybear. Continuing our series of helping new players get into Baldur's Gate 3 if they've never played D&D or they've never played CRPGs before. And today I want to talk all about the basics of combat. Tips and tricks that you need to know, explanations for all the things that seem that complicated but actually are very simple, and everything in between. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you do come hang out with me and the community, you're going to think that you are out of snacks, your favorite snack, in your kitchen or in your pantry. And when you go to look, you're going to realize that there was one left when you were thinking there wasn't. So let's dive into the combat system in Baldur's Gate 3. If you're looking for an explanation on character stats, I have a video for that, so you'll find that down below in the description. And also videos going over all of the classes in the game, and of course the subclasses, races, and subraces. So all of those, I will assume that you know going into this video, and we're just going to talk about the combat itself. And I want to treat this like all the other videos, at just a very high level, explained in simple terms, so that people that are coming into the game for the first time, or maybe they just don't play these games a lot, it can be very accessible for you and you can just enjoy the game for what it is. Baldur's Gate 3 is a tactical turn-based game. It is played in a pseudo real-time environment, but realistically it is turn-based. Every character is taking turns. And if you look at the basis, like D&D that this is based on, there's a certain amount of time that is passing with each turn. So it's kind of like the passage of time. But as you take turns, there will be powers and actions and things that you can do and benefits for doing those. And sometimes there's going to be a name, like a proper noun for something that's really just a simple mechanic that you might just want to be aware of and utilize. And as long as you know what it is, it's not that big a deal. When combat begins, you will determine a roll order, who goes in what order and when do people get to attack. And you'll see this at the top of the screen. This is the same for like card games and tactic games. There has to be an order. This is rolled through initiative, which is a system that determines who goes in what order and is usually rolled off of dexterity plus some other benefits. And so when the round starts, when battle begins, initiative is rolled and you'll put people in order based on who got the highest and who got the lowest. You can ambush enemies outside of combat. So right now you can see that I'm sitting here outside of combat. These enemies have not noticed me yet. By the way, you can press left shift to reveal the sight lines of enemies, and then you can sneak up on them and ambush them, which will cause them to be surprised. This will take away their opportunity to have a first turn and is exceptionally powerful. So being able to initiate combat on your terms, through your way, through stealth, or from coming out of line of sight, or attacking people from range when they don't know you're there, is a big benefit because you essentially get to go first, and then they lose their first turn, and then you get to start the second turn first. And so you get to go twice before they even get to go once, which is huge. You can do this anytime during combat or outside of combat by using the hide button, which is your base, those 4 blue abilities you can see down at the bottom, the C key. You'll be able to hide, crouch down. If you pass the stealth check or no one's looking at you, you will enter into stealth. And from this position, you will see that on my cursor, I have this stealth icon. When it's a full sun, it means that I'm in plain view and everyone can see me. When it's a half-filled sun, it means it's kind of a mixture of the two depending on the lighting and the sight line. And when it's completely empty, it means that I'm in perfect darkness. It's not very bright where I am, and it's very hard to see me, which means you're gonna get some bonuses to being able to stay in that stealth state. Every character in the game has movement speed. This will be on your character creation screen as part of your racial bonus, but some classes get bonuses. You can also dash to make this longer. And this is essentially how far you can move in a single turn. And this affects when you can get into range with things, when you can get into a position that you want to be in, and you can see based on where you're putting your cursor, how far you can go. When it turns red, it means you don't have any more movable distance anymore. And when it's white, you still have that option. And again, you can do things like drink potions. You can activate the dash ability, which allows you to go even further. And in some cases, you can get abilities that do this even more as well. And this allows you to position certain places or go certain ways and be on proper terms to attack enemies in the way that you want. And it is a resource. You can move a little bit and do something and then move a little bit, and you just have a limited amount of how far you can go in a single turn before you have to end your turn and move on until further on in the battle. There are 3 main categories, more or less. There's some exceptions, but 3 main categories of what your character can do when you're in combat. The 2 primary ones are a action and a bonus action. And they distinct these because sometimes something isn't really all that impactful. It's not a huge thing that you're doing, say you scratch your nose versus hurling a spear at someone, those two things shouldn't be weighed the same as being an action, and so they split them into two categories. And so you have action and you have bonus action, and each character each turn can take one of each. You can move until you have no movement available allotment, and then you can take an action and you can take a bonus action. And there are lots of really cool ways that you can game this system too. Some classes can turn an action into a bonus action. Some classes can take multiple actions per turn or multiple bonus actions per turn. So you have these two resources available, and so when you're looking at an ability and it says that it's an action or a bonus action, it lets you know what category it falls into when you're trying to plan out your attack. There's a third type of action that you don't really get to directly control, and that is a reaction. And this happens a lot, and will start happening more and more as you get deeper into the story and the game gets more fleshed out. But this is something that happens to you when you're not on your turn and you get the chance to do something. So monks have the ability to deflect projectiles. And so when it's not your turn and the enemy shoots at you, you have the opportunity to react and knock the projectile away or throw it back at them. You have the opportunity to react and do some throws that might help you in your situation. And for the most part, characters can only do this once per turn. So if you're a monk and you can deflect projectiles and you get shot at by 5 enemies, you're not going to be able to deflect every single one. So again, it follows the same system of one action, one bonus action, and one reaction until it becomes your turn again. But that's how the system is comprised. Now, when it comes to attacking on the back end, you are still rolling dice and doing calculations. But the benefit of this being a video game on a computer that can do calculations for you, you don't have to do the math, you don't have to think about it, you just play the game as if it were a tactic game, and you attack, and all of those calculations will be done for you. But those things are still happening behind the scenes. So when you are going to attack an enemy, there are ways that you can increase or improve this as long as you know how the system works. I talked about this a little bit in the class stats video, but when you calculate whether or not you're going to hit a target or how much damage you will deal to the target, it first rolls a dice that's specified by the ability and the constraints of what you're doing. It then will add in any modifiers that you have. So if it is a strength-based attack and you have high strength, say you have 16 strength plus 3 as a modifier to that, it'll make the roll better because you're doing something that you excel at. And then it'll also add in any other bonuses you have, like proficiency. So if you're using a weapon you're proficient in, if you're doing an action you're proficient in, those bonuses will also be applied. And this goes into making your character and making your party very strong and wholesome and well put together, as you want to have people doing what they're good at with stats that support that and have proficiencies that make it even better. And that goes in the way of dealing damage to enemies. You and every character in the game will have an armor class, which is kind of like a defense score. And based on how well your attack went, you will have different effects that will affect the result of the damage to the target based on their armor class or their basic innate armor if they're not something that wears armor, like a creature or an animal or something like that. And you can inspect the enemies by right-clicking on them and going to examine. This will tell you all about that enemy that you're looking at, including if they have resistances, if they have any vulnerabilities, what their armor class is, what they're weak to. And so you want to pay attention to primarily their vulnerabilities as well. So when you examine an enemy and it says that they're vulnerable to bludgeoning, you know that if you use a bludgeoning weapon, you'll get bonuses to that roll when attacking that target. But you also want to pay attention to resistances as well. Maybe you're using a fire spell and the target that you're casting it on is resistant to fire. And so you may want to maybe have that fire caster attack someone else and bring over one of your martial classes to take that target down because the fire spells are going to be less effective. Another big part of this is your HP, your total maximum HP value, shown at the bottom of your character icon. And when this reaches 0, you will collapse to the ground. And there's a lot of different rules around how this works and what can happen around it. But just know that you have a max HP when enemies attack you based on whatever conditions meet that. If they have advantage or disadvantage, or they have an attack of opportunity, or they do a crit or something like that, then the number will come through. But when your HP reaches 0, unless you have like a half-orc trait, you will then be put into a downed state. You'll be go prone and you'll become incapacitated. And this basically starts a very doomed process for you that could go well or it could go very poorly. You will then start rolling to see if you will survive bleeding out on the ground. Every turn that you're on the ground, you'll roll a dice, and if you pass the roll, then you get 1 stack of pass. If you fail the roll, you'll get 1 stack of fail, and if you ever get to 3 passes total, then you stand up and you recover, you get a second wind, and you're good to go. If you ever get 3 stacks of fail, then you die and you're dead get owned. Now, if you're in this down state, any character that can heal, especially from range, can just cast a heal on you to get you back up from the ground. This makes clerics and druids primarily, and bards as well, very powerful and not required, but very recommended classes to have in your composition, because it means that you can get people up from a distance when they get knocked down. On top of that, you can also go over to the character and use the help action, which every character has access to. You basically go over and you help that person. Either you help them stand up when they're on the ground, you can help them get out of a sticky situation, you can help them out of some kind of status effect. The most common use for this is to walk over and get someone up who's bleeding, because again, if they get 3 fail rolls, they just die. And so if you can get over there before they roll 3 times and get them up out of the ground, it doesn't matter if they were passing or failing, they're back up and they're back into the fight. And one thing you have to be aware of is attacks of opportunity. And what these are, which I tried to capture footage of, but I didn't even show the camera, is that if you go within range of an enemy and then you turn your back and try to run from them, the enemy will get a chance to have an attack of opportunity, which can be devastating. You can use abilities like disengage when you're in melee range of a target and you want to get away. You can also shove them or stun them or CC them. Just be aware that attacks of opportunity are there. If you turn your back on an enemy and try to run, they're not going to just let you walk away. And also keep in mind that it is possible to get overkilled, which means that if you take a hit that's too big based on your current HP, armor class, things like that, you can actually just get killed outright. If it's too much of a damage blow, you won't even go into the down state and start rolling to see if you stand back up. You will just die completely. And don't worry if you're someone that really cares about specific characters or companions. There's a lot of ways that you can resurrect allies that die. You can buy a scroll for just currency and use that to bring them back to life. And of course, there's the save system in the game, which is a good thing to transition to out of dying. Since this is a tactical game, a turn-based game, you want to be using the quick save feature often. You can press F5 on PC at any time and it'll create a quick save, and you can just freely jump back to that save and play again from a different checkpoint. Depending on who you talk to and how hardcore they are, they may have a different perspective on how often you should use this. Some people believe that it's called save scumming, in that you F5, do an action, when it fails, you roll back a couple seconds and try again or do something different, versus then just letting the situation play out. All I'm gonna say is play however you want, do whatever you want, but just be aware that if you go long periods of time without saving, if you die and your party dies, you'll have to go back to the previous save. So just be mindful of this and to be ready to be pressing that F5 button regularly and creating saves regularly so that you can go through the world without losing much progress. The next thing to talk about is advantages and disadvantages. This I explained in the class stat video, but it's worth reiterating here, as it is a pretty simple system that seems to trip a lot of new players up in general. You can be attacking or doing an action from a even state, or you can be doing it with an advantage or with a disadvantage. And all this means is that if you are attacking with advantage, it means that you roll twice and take the higher of the 2 numbers. It's a little bit of bad luck protection, and that's all it is. It means that you have an advantage over the situation or action you're trying to complete, and you just have a little bit of bad luck protection so that if you roll poorly, you'll still be able to get a better of the 2 numbers. And disadvantage is exactly the opposite, as you would expect. If you have disadvantage, you're going to roll twice and take the lower of the 2 numbers, where advantage is bad luck protection. Disadvantage is almost like bad luck insurance. It ensures that you're going to have bad luck. Next, let's talk about spellcasting, because I know a lot of people love the spellcasters in Baldur's Gate 3 and will be playing one for their first playthrough, or maybe in their first few, or maybe in every single playthrough going forward. So how do spells work? What is spellcasting? What is all of that? It is considered an action just like any other action, which means that it has a primary stat or stats associated with it. So when you try to perform it, there will be bonuses to doing that action. So for example, if you're using a strength martial weapon and you attack, it'll roll based on your strength to give you a modifier to make that roll better. plus proficiencies with that weapon, and the same is true for spells as well. And so if you're casting a sorcerer ability, it might be based on charisma. Maybe if you're a wizard, it might be based on intelligence, but the more of that stat and the more proficiencies you have, the more effective, more powerful, and more likely to succeed that attack will be. But the spellcasting system actually has a lot of proper nouns that go along with it that make it confusing for new players, but they're really not that complicated at all. Firstly, every spell has a level associated with it, whether it says it or not. So it's either a level 0, a level 1, or level 2, and you do not have infinite casts of most spells in Baldur's Gate 3 in between going to camp and resting. I liken this to like Dark Souls or Souls-like games that use the same system, whereas you can only use your lightning spell 6 times before you have to go back to the bonfire. It's the same mechanic here in that you can only use a specific spell type a certain number of times without replenishing those cast numbers or going back and resting in between combat encounters. And so you have that as a core mechanic for it. Down at the very bottom of the screen, you can see for each character how many charges of each level of spell that you have. And these are your spell slots. You can think of them as charges for using a spell. The level of the spell will be listed on the spell slot number, and when you hover over a spell to use it, the spell slot that it will consume if you decide to use it will start blinking, and so you can very easily see that this is the one that I'm about to cast. So just pay attention to that here in the bottom middle of the screen when you have those. Keep in mind that most spellcasters will unlock additional spell slots as they level up, or through different bonuses, things that they collect, things that they put on, and all kinds of stuff. So if you're looking to increase the amount of spells that you can cast, you can do that by getting stronger and exploring the world. And the rules there will be explained to you as you go along. But there's a very reasonable question to be asked for spellcasters is, what happens when you run out of spell charges and you can't cast any spells? Do you just pop up a lawn chair and go sit in the corner while all the martial and utility classes finish out the battle? And the answer is no. There is a spell system that works for powerful spells and for weaker spells. And that is what's known as a cantrip, which you can think of as a level 0 spell that has one spell slot available to it that is infinite and does not need to be recharged. That's what cantrips are. And so when you're making your character and you're looking at cantrips, or you see that you can gain access to cantrips, that's what it means. It's some kind of spell casting ability, some kind of bonus or skill that does not need to be recharged and can be used infinitely, that allows you to work that into your gameplay. And some of this is part of why people multi-class. They want to pick up cantrips like Eldritch Blast from Warlock so that they can easily use something like that repeatedly and get stronger. You can also buff up your cantrips as you go along. And if you look at classes like Sorcerer, they focus a lot on raising their spell level so they can cast really high level spells, but they can only use a certain number of them each time that they rest. Some classes and some setups will require you to set your spells ahead of time. Depending on your class and setup, right, you might be able to set out whatever spells you want to use for that encounter ahead of time and go into the battle. Some let you swap it freely as you go through, and then those restrictions will be listed there as you go along. Another very good thing to know about the spellcasting system is, yes, you do have a certain number of spell slots for the tier or the quality of the spell. So the question has to be asked then, what happens if I have no level 1 spell slots available and I want to cast a level 1 spell, but I do have a level 2 spell slot available? Can I cast that level 1 spell using the level 2 spell slot? And the answer is yes, and it will increase the power and value of that spell when you use a higher spell slot. But the reverse is not true. If you have a level 2 spell slot, or if you have a level 1 spell slot and you're out of level 2 spell slots or charges, and you try to cast a level 2 spell, it won't work. You can only go down in the spell slot category. And so you, based on what you're playing, usually wizards, warlocks, and sorcerers, if they have higher spell slot options, you can choose to use lower level spells in those spell slots, and it will beef it up in various ways. Another thing to think about for casters in general is you won't be able to cast if you're wearing armor you're not proficient in. So if you're wondering why you can't cast, check your gear and make sure you're properly equipped. And when you're going about the battle, you want to think about advantages and disadvantages, right? We talked about these already, but there's plenty of them that exist in the game. There's probably too many to list here in a video. Comment down below if you want me to make a video going over things like this, like very niche stuff in battle. But think about this. If you have the high ground Anakin, then you will have an advantage against targets if you're high enough above them. You also, if you're using a ranged weapon point blank, you will be at disadvantage. So if a melee enemy gets right up close to your ranger and you're using your bow, you might want to shove them away to get them further away so that you don't have that disadvantage roll when you're trying to use your bow in melee range. There's tons of these exist. Most of them make sense for what you would expect to make the game a little bit more realistic and kind of immersive as you're trying to go through the world and use your strategy in your brain. But I think there's enough that we can break that out into a different video. And I want to leave you with just some general advice and tips on the core base abilities that every character has access to regardless of their setup, because they can make a world of difference in the combat that you're having without getting too niche or specific in the combat themselves. You want to utilize the jump ability as much as you can. That's on Z, at least in early access. This might change for launch. And you can do this to jump up to higher elevation, jump down to lower elevation. You can also use it to clear obstacles, or say you get stuck in a fire patch or an acid patch or a lightning patch, and you don't want to walk through that and take damage. You can jump out of it or jump over it so that you don't have to take that damage and worry about taking damage from that. The hide ability can be used in combat or out of combat to go stealth, get surprise attacks on people, or avoid detection. Shove is a great way to wake allies up that might be sleeping, or if there's an enemy standing near a cliff, you want to go to the other side of them and shove them off the cliff, and you might kill them or they'll take a bunch of falling damage. You can also, like I mentioned, shove away melee targets that might be standing on top of you as a ranged character, and so you want to get that advantage roll back by being at a sufficient range. There is a dash ability which will extend your distance that you can move. If all you're doing that turn is moving, you just want to get really far away or go help someone or go get in the right position for the right time, dash is great. You can throw things. Anything can be thrown. You can throw weapons at people and hit them with it. If you look on the weapon itself, it'll say, if it has a thrown detail on it, like a stat thrown on it, it'll do its weapon damage when it hits. If it doesn't, then it'll do a minor amount of damage and just do concussive. And you can also pick things up and use them too. I mean, you can pick up boxes, you can pick up furniture, you can pick up anything that's on the ground or interactable. You have the chance to pick it up. Based on your strength stat, you may need more strength to pick it up. And if you can pick it up, your strength stat will also determine how far you can throw it or what you can do it. But you can also pick up living creatures. You can literally pick up a mother trucker and hit a mother trucker with another mother trucker by just carrying them and beating them with their own teammate. And on the far right side, you have all your consumables that you brought with you, one-time use spells, potions, scrolls, things like that, that can make a very big difference in the battle. But I think this video has already gone on long enough. I think this hopefully covers the basics of combat in Baldur's Gate 3 and makes it a little bit easier to understand if you're just getting into the game. So if you found value in the video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and I'll see you on my live stream. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.